The possibility of a wet weekend at the Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve in Canada ignites the Formula One scene. The historic Ferrari team, as well as Red Bull, are grateful for the adverse weather conditions. For the Italian side, there are several aspects to exploit in theory. With a wet track surface, the time spent on straights doesn't vary excessively. Conversely, the seconds per lap on the slower sections of the track increase proportionally. This means that lap time performance will be less sensitive to aerodynamic efficiency values, a factor that will benefit the SF-24 car. Ground clearances will be increased, and the underbody will work further from the optimal balance. For this reason, cars equipped with aerodynamic devices less sensitive to height variations can reap good benefits in such conditions, and Ferrari is among these, as far as we know. Furthermore, the Italian F1 car can produce an excellent amount of load through the bodywork, another element from which the Maranello technicians, drivers, and engineers will seek to derive maximum advantages. As mentioned, Red Bull itself seems quite content with the weather, especially with Max Verstappen apparently thinking that this way he can hide some shortcomings of the RB20 single-seater. As predicted, the Maranello team arrives in Canada with the second version of the rear wing. We are talking about the version first introduced on the SF-24 during the F1 tests at the Fiorano circuit preceding the Imola weekend. A rear wing that adapts very well to the aerodynamic compromise Ferrari seeks to be aerodynamically efficient. With a wet track, the load will need to be increased. However, the third specification, the one introduced in Monaco with high downforce, has not been chosen. The load will be adjusted around the optimal value thanks to the variation in the angle of the beam wing. The latter is crucial in order to properly work the car's floor diffuser system. The biplane of the appendix in question acts as a real extension of the diffuser, which in turn increases its volume. For the rest, we can assert that Ferrari is continuing the search for the best setup on the updated version. The chosen specification differs from the previous equivalent version in the wingtips configuration. This way, the tuning of the all-red F1 is optimized, always using the same load level. Thanks to this operation data in hand, it is much easier to find a compromise between high and low speed, a crucial element in Formula One. On the contrary, observing the images from the Montreal pit lane on Thursday, we see that Red Bull is equipped with the version with more load that they have already used in several events this year. A choice which effectively uses downforce above the optimal point, since the main plane has a more pronounced frontal area than Ferrari's. They can do this because the efficiency level is higher, and having more load will be important in wet track conditions. Superior downforce load also stabilizes the rear of the car, especially in medium-speed corners. The goal is to plant the rear on the ground on entry while contributing significantly to the improvement of traction, a fundamental aspect especially at certain points of the Canadian track. Ultimately, the lap time can be built in many different ways. For this reason, currently, evaluating beforehand the feasibility or not of one configuration over the other doesn't seem so wise. Lastly, let's also take a look at McLaren. The MCL-38 chooses the same version of the wing used in China, Japan, and recently also at the Imola circuit. This specification ensures a medium level of aerodynamic load, through which the English cars of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri can reach high top speeds. As for Mercedes, at the moment, it seems that the technicians have chosen the version already seen in Miami. We are talking about a specification with a concept similar to that of McLaren, which aims to optimize top speeds while providing a sufficient level of load. Charles Leclerc and Scuderia Ferrari therefore seem to be among the favorites for victory in the Canadian Grand Prix this weekend. It is not the Maranello team itself proclaiming this, of course, but rather the competitors putting pressure on what still seems to be a great moment for those driving the updated version of the SF-24, a car that from the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix seems to have taken a significant step forward, but overall probably not yet at the level of the Red Bull RB20, and perhaps on par with the McLaren MCL-38. From track to track, the balance of power could vary, and as always in modern Formula One, a tiny detail, even seemingly insignificant, can make a big difference. The layout of the circuit, for example, is crucial, and that of Montreal could actually play into Ferrari's hands, although the weather variable could disrupt everything, and already in these hours, rain has been falling heavily in Quebec, and especially at Gilles-Villeneuve. Charles Leclerc doesn't feel in any way like the one to beat, also because recent history has shown how Red Bull is the stronger car overall, And if we want, it seems that the RB20 is still ahead of everyone, although not as dominant as it was a few races ago. We think of China, the last true peak of mastery by the car, and Max Verstappen, while in the last 3 events, a completely different F1 has been seen. The victory in Monaco has given Charles Leclerc and Ferrari a considerable awareness. Clearly, the Monaco weekend often stands out on its own, but without a competitive car, given the strong competition to be at the front, you don't bring the weekend in Monte Carlo home. The SF-24 is there. We've analyzed it extensively in the last few weeks, but now we need the definitive proof, although before Barcelona, it's unlikely we'll have clear answers. Indeed, the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona is a standard track where everyone expects a strong return from Red Bull. Before the Spanish appointment, however, we have to race in Canada, and given what's been coming down from the sky in recent hours, the forces on the track could have further disruption. For Red Bull, the biggest advantage is called Max Verstappen, a great driver in wet conditions. Charles Leclerc wasn't overly concerned about these conditions, but the Monegasque seemed to have clear ideas in case it rained. He expressed a preference for a wet qualifying and a dry race, stating that racing in wet conditions makes the strategy more challenging due to the longer distance and additional variables that complicate matters if the performance is good. Charles Leclerc's comments indicated Ferrari's expectation of a very competitive SF-24 car in race pace, possibly slightly less so in dry qualifying. Rain could potentially help in starting further forward, but didn't imply expecting a slow car on Saturday. Everything would need to be seen as weather conditions were continuously changing, making the weekend uncertain until the last moment. The Maranello team, led by team principal Frédéric Vasseur, likely felt positive pressure for the first time. They probably considered themselves the car to beat in the Canadian Grand Prix, particularly over long runs, but expected a much closer and balanced competition for pole position and victory throughout the Montreal weekend. It was an unprecedented situation that could be pleasing in some ways, but as Hamilton said a few days ago, it's easier to be a predator than prey. Charles Leclerc did not want to take on the role of favorite, probably because the SF-24 overall couldn't afford it. He dismissed any such notion, noting that sometimes it was Marco saying they were the favorites, other times Norris. In reality, no one wanted to be considered the favorite, and he would not claim it either, preferring to pass the hot potato to others. He acknowledged that Ferrari was very close to McLaren and Red Bull, and whoever did the best job over the weekend would be rewarded. A different attitude now prevails at Ferrari. There's an awareness of having returned to the elite through the hard and patient work of the past year and a half. They take risks, something that never happened under Mattia Binotto's management. Just remember the debacle at the Silverstone circuit back in 2022, to cite an episode that was very unfavorable to the Monegasque driver. The situation is clearly changing, but as always, the track will be the ultimate judge.